Hi, I'm Ray and this is TinyTableGames. Today I'm doing something a little bit different. I'm getting started with Battletech Alpha Strike, which, for those of you who don't know, is the most recent edition of Battletech, which is significantly different than classic Battletech. And as I got ready for this, I thought rather than cram all this what's different into the first play video, I thought I'd make a video about what's different. And the more I thought about that, the more I kind of got into the, if you've ever been to a game store and then you go talk to that one guy who's sitting there setting stuff up and you say something and it starts a whole chain of conversation, yeah, I tend to be that guy. So if you're interested, please like and subscribe, help the channel grow. And let's talk about Battletech, how it grew, and how market influences turned it into Alpha Strike from classic Battletech. So I should say from the outset that my perspective on this is not as a game developer. I never worked for Catalyst Games or FASA or WizKids or Tops, I think briefly held it, the Battletech license. But I did work in a comic store for a very long time, comic and game store, worked for various game companies, helped at conventions, ran tons of tournaments, various judging, yada, yada, yada through the years, both in Magic, Yu-Gi-Oh, Battletech, you name it. Been a gamer for a very long time. So that's the perspective that I'm coming from as somebody who worked in retail for quite a long time and is an avid player of all the stuff I used to sell. So, Battletech originally came out in 1984 by FASA, which was the original company that produced it. Michael Stackpole, they also produced Shadowrun. That was their other big title at the time. They had a third box game that was hex-based and counters, which is little cardboard chits for those of you who don't know. And hex spaces were all the rage at that time. Why was that the case? Because war games and role-playing games were the two main categories of games as far as wargaming goes. So back in the day, you couldn't have a war game if you didn't have hex maps and little counters that you were pushing around. Think Advanced Squad Leader or many of the GMT games up into the mid-90s, even now actually. That's like classic wargaming. So when Battletech came along, they still have hex maps, but now they use miniatures. But they also keep it real crunchy, and there's lots of specifications about so much armor here, so much armor here, so much armor here, roll to hit, piloting rules, heat checks, where's the weapon, how fast can you move, torso twisting, how hard can you turn, all that good stuff. So still very crunchy as far as that goes. And it was quite popular. Lots of stuff coming out for it, novels, source books, expanding the lore of it and whatnot over time, and much like Shadowrun, FASA had the concept of making both areas living, which is to say, as years progress in real time, they would progress time in their game worlds to keep things interesting and new and developments carrying on and all that. And I could make a whole nother video about Shadowrun because I used to run Shadowrun games for years and years and years and years. Anyway, so there you go. Battletech's grinding along. It's doing pretty well for itself as well as anything in that era. And then the year just before FASA released Battletech, another weird little game came out called Warhammer Fantasy by Games Workshop, which at the time was very much based on old Civil War miniatures, tabletop stuff, like you see from Osprey Games, where everybody was in a little formation and you had to maneuver, and they had maneuver trays and everybody had to stay in formation. And, that was also very crunchy for its time. And the maneuver trays and stuff were expected for war games at the time. And the miniatures, of course, being Games Workshop, were awesome. Not quite as awesome as they are now. They actually look better now than they ever have. But back then, they were the top of the line for what existed. So you kind of had the Battletech people, which were very crunchy. You had the Warhammer people, which were less crunchy, but lots of paint and flair and much better maps and settings, because Warhammer, of course, is played on a big tabletop with actual terrain and all that. Battletech is played on flat hex maps, or if you're really fancy, you got little polystyrene hex squares and built up little things that look a lot like HeroScape maps now, which is in fact where HeroScape got the idea from. So, that said, time goes by, and not too much changes really. Things are just grinding along, board games coming out, you know, there's the Battletechers, there's the Warhammer players, and there's the D&D players. And that's pretty much the three main camps. If you went to your comic book shop, you'd see the Battletech guys in one corner, you'd see the Warhammer people over there, and you'd see the role-playing guys in the back being really loud and annoying everybody else in the store. So, that pretty much continued on until 1987, 1988, which is when Warhammer 40K came out, the science fiction version of Warhammer. And that swept Warhammer Fantasy right off the shelves as far as most people were concerned. Everybody loved Space Marines, everybody loved 40K. It instantly shot to the top, and it's pretty much stayed there ever since, as far as hobby sales go. That started to really put pressure on FASA with their Battletech license, and it basically caused kind of a shift in retail. Because if you think about it, your average comic book shop only has so much money to put games on the shelf with, right? And this is before Kickstarter, none of that existed. So if you wanted something, you went to your friendly local game store and you bought it there. Because that was about the only place who was going to carry any of that stuff at the time. So you only have so much space on your shelf. Your local friendly local game store guy only has so much money to buy inventory. So you buy what sells and wait for people to ask you for stuff and order that for them special. So as time progressed, Warhammer Fantasy's market shrank a little bit, 40K's market expanded like crazy, and Battletech slowly started to shrink. So FASA had other stuff going on at the same time, other interests, stuff was going on, and table space at your friendly local game store was limited, right? Now people are still playing Battletech. The grognard group, which is an old phrase for guys who like extraordinarily crunchy, very detailed, almost painfully detailed war games. And then there's the 40K players, which a lot of the old grognard, advanced squad leader, Battletech players, people like that kind of sneered at, because 40K is much more pick up a handful, six-sided dice, chuck them, and see what happens. It's much quicker, and that's why you can have whole tournaments and stuff, and Battletech plays slow. If you have a 5-on-5 game of battle mechs in Battletech, that's going to take you like 8 hours. It can be quite grimly long, which does not lend itself towards tournaments and things like that, which is why you'd see at conventions, by the way, there'd usually be some guy saying, Battletech tournament. What they really mean is they're gonna bring up a ridiculous amount of miniatures, set up a whole bunch of terrain with their maps and the little hex things and everything, and play a weekend-long game, which is about all they'd get through, if they even finish the one. So, 40K comes out, starts taking a lot of the market space and a lot of the table space at your friendly local game store, and then there was kind of a seismic shift. Magic the Gathering hits in '93, basically. And that changed everything once again. Now you have a whole separate market of games that didn't really exist before. Collectible trading card games, miniature games, and tabletop war games, and role-playing games. And from a friendly local game store perspective, card games, easier to stock and sell like crazy. Even Warhammer in its best days, it's a fairly heavy investment and it takes time to move because people need to build their army, then they want to paint their army, they play with their army, and then they make modifications. So you'll get new players into the hobby, which is where the biggest sales are from that regard. Buying, okay, here's my starter set, here's my army, here's that, you know, or here's the new edition. And those are when the big sales hit for things like 40K and Fantasy. Or the rest of the time, it's like paints and picking up units here and there. Battletech's even slower in that regard. But Magic the Gathering and its 5,000 clone games that came out shortly thereafter really was a huge money injection to the game industry. Now, why am I talking about that with Battletech? The reason why is because that pushed everything else off the tables at your friendly local game store. Why? Because it sold well. Wizards of the Coast was supporting it well with like Friday Night Magic and leagues and local tournaments and stuff like that. So that was really making a huge impact to local game stores. Now, they were still making space for 40K all the time. Fantasy was starting to fade away at this point. from that perspective. I mean, it still existed, they're still doing it, but even Games Workshop saw that 40K was where the money was, and they really started leaning into supporting that. They made some really neat Warhammer Fantasy stuff, but it just wasn't the same as the rate of updates and new models and new books and new scenarios and supporting novels and all that stuff is for 40K. Meanwhile, Battletech releases are getting slower and slower. People still love it. It's still interesting, but it plays slower. You can't get through it in an afternoon generally at a game store, and it just wasn't as, just didn't catch people's eye. New players weren't really coming into as much. So, Games Workshop came, of course, with the next big thing, which was Necromunda and Mordheim in '95. This was a big change for them because now it's skirmish level games. So you don't need necessarily a 4x8 table with a whole giant mess of terrain. You can have a much smaller table with a smaller group, and Blood Bowl comes out in about there too, and a few of their other smaller scale games, Space Hulk, things like that. So people really get into that. Now you can play Blood Bowl, you can play Mordheim, you can play Necromunda, and play it. People did. Smaller buy-in requirement, one box set, usually about $100 at the time, and that give you 2 gangs, all the rules you ever needed. I know, and a few other things. And over time, you can pick up new gangs, or they release individual gang members for hire, or same for Blood Bowl. That model really hasn't changed. And so people could have a smaller footprint, which means you could have twice as many games playing in your game store, which means you can get twice as many players in there for tournaments and fun events and weekends and Blood Bowl tournaments, which, by the way, never underestimate how much fun a Blood Bowl tournament can be if the friendly local game store tries to hype it up like it's a college sporting event. That can actually be a blast. And a lot of people can fit in there, and you don't, it's the buy-in level is really low. One team, 10 to 12 guys, one guy has the board, and you're good to go. So it's a much easier entry level, and it hooks people into things like 40K and fantasy and all that. So whole big growth path. In any case, for your friendly local game store, that's good news. Necromunda's out in '95, Mordheim's out in roughly the same time frame. Another game hits the market just about the same time. Heavy Gear by DreamPod 9, a Canadian company. Heavy Gear is like an anime-style Battletech with cleaner rules, or slimmer rules really I should say, and a neat background and pretty nifty miniatures. All metal at the time still. They didn't really have anything in plastic at that point. So people used to joke, they're very bulky miniatures, very, like I said, anime style. But that became an alternative for new players who didn't want to get mired into the years at that point of Battletech lore and the, to new players, somewhat tedious methods of play. When Heavy Gear plays faster, looks like anime, feels different than 40K because it's not grimdark at all, and just plays right along. So it doesn't get a huge market share, but a lot of people liked it. I played it we had a whole like communities doing that one too. So, you know, at that point you had a lot of different armies rolling around. That takes more table space, right? So now you've got a little bit of space for Battletech if people are playing it. Always got space for 40K, Necromunda, Mordheim, whatever the newest Games Workshop thing is everybody's into at that moment. And Magic the Gathering or whatever clone is out that week, although Magic usually is the only one who really survived most of the 90s because there was a lot of other card games came out. It kind of just kept rolling like that. And of course the role-playing guys in the back are still making a lot of noise and annoying everybody. So, basically market share is shifting away from classic Grognard style, old school, hex-based, very detailed, rules crunchy games, and shifting more towards grab a fistful of D6s and chuck it on the table and watch the chaos. People like painting the miniatures, it likes moving faster. People don't have that much time to invest in it because people are busy. Life moves on. You know, people get bored or things change or, you know, your kids go to school, all that kind of stuff impacts how much time people have to show up to the game store and play on a weekend or a weeknight or whatever. Which is another reason why Magic continued to dominate, is because it's easy. You can fit it in your pocket, although only an insane person would carry a deck of Magic cards around in their pocket as opposed to a well-protected system. But nonetheless, you see my point. So, the next big thing that happened that shifted things is Dungeons & Dragons 3rd edition. Prior to this, all through that time frame I was just talking about, the reason the tabletop role-playing games were kind of fading out, other than like Shadowrun and, you know, Vampires kicking off and all that, but generally you didn't see people playing Vampire in a game store during the daytime because the Masquerade was much too detailed and required a lot of extra space, and everybody made fun of them. So, you know, but D&D 3rd edition came out, which is when pretty much Wizards of the Coast picked it up. TSR, Pete Atkinson had snuck out there and talked to those guys, and the whole big changeover had happened and all that. And there's a ton of stuff about that. Go look it up. It's all very interesting. But it revitalized Dungeons and Dragons big time. So now, more shelf space gone at your friendly local game store. Now for all the revitalized Dungeons and Dragons stuff that people are buying like crazy. At the same time, a new concept comes out from WizKids Games, Mage Knight. Now, the Mage Knight guys, because I was at Gen Con when they premiered it, I was talking with them, and they said they sat around their office and cried, and they thought they were going to go out of business with their very first batch, because Mage Knight was the first click-based game. You know, Hero Clicks, Mage Knight, all that stuff. And they said the paint jobs were so bad they were afraid absolutely no one was going to buy them, and they were the first game to do blind boxes, which is, of course, a thing everybody does for all sorts of things now. But back in the day, after playing Battletech and Warhammer and all that, you knew what you were buying, and that was that. The concept of blind box gaming and collectability, they were trying to integrate that dopamine hit you get from Magic the Gathering with the tabletop game. And despite the wretched paint jobs of the first rounds that literally made the people who worked for WizKids cry in their offices, it went really well, and people loved it. And so they came out with HeroClix not too long after that, and people were playing those like crazy, including me. Had way too many bins, like big old moving bins, full of Mage Knight figures and HeroClix figures, and still had my Warhammer Fantasy armies and my Warhammer armies and 40K armies and some Battletech stuff in the corner that I wasn't really using anymore, and some you know, Pokemon cards, because that had come out by this time, so who wasn't playing Magic was playing Pokemon. And never underestimate Pokemon's footprint, because, man, you get little kids into a game store, their parents start shelling out money, which is when I turned into a Pokemon gym leader for a while at the local comic book and game store, because everybody liked to bring in their kids, and suddenly the comic book shop is a babysitting service for the day, which was kind of annoying. On the other hand, they bought a lot of stuff, so it kind of worked out. That said, all of that is still pushing classic wargaming kind of off into a corner that there's just no market for. People's interest has largely shifted in other places. So, let's see. In 2001, with all the CCG market going insane, Pokemon, Magic, all the other ones, Yu-Gi-Oh was coming out. Even Games Workshop was starting to sink, honestly. And if you go look at like Peachy, who used to work at Games Workshop, or Rogue Hobbies, or all that, or Jervis Johnson and the Perry Twins and all those guys, Wargaming Illustrated is where they're at now. I strongly recommend you go check out those old histories that they've put up on YouTube and other places, done some interviews. It's very interesting stuff, talking about all that. And as the forever 900-pound gorilla in the gaming world for tabletop war games, and what they did change things. That said, the point of that is even they were struggling about then, because CCGs were soaking up all the market space that in Dungeons & Dragons 3rd edition in your friendly local game store. We were selling a ton of it. That's all anybody asked us for. 40K still showed up occasionally, but honestly, not that much. It was much more role-playing games, board games at that point. You know, like Settlers of Catan, things like that was getting really hot. And just Battletech wasn't played by anybody at that point. Warhammer Fantasy wasn't played by hardly anybody. There was some Necromunda and some other stuff, but not that much. All right, so, however, Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings comes out in 2001, and that saves Games Workshop, according to their own people, because they produce a metric ton of Lord of the Rings, Middle-earth, battle role-playing games, and tabletop war games, and a ton of miniatures, and still do to this day. And it's honestly an excellent game system, and people pick it up like crazy. Now, they're still playing HeroClix and Mage Knight, And that's doing really well for WizKids, incredibly well. They keep coming out with new sets and new sets and new sets. And Battletech is nowhere, basically, in the market. So WizKids in 2002, buys the Battletech license from FASA. So now WizKids owns Battletech. And this was a huge deal to those who still played Battletech, the classic kind, on the hex map with the crunchy armor bladings, mappings and right torso, left torso weapons, and marking everything off. Because HeroClix, click, 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 was now coming. The same method was coming to Battletech, and in fact, all the Battletech things were blind boxed. And ironically, they called that Battletech the Dark Age. And to classic Battletech players, it certainly was the Dark Age, because it was no longer the game they recognized, and it made them very sad. And so you'd see people saying, well, I still have all my old books, and I'll use those. Because no new books were coming out outside of some novels to support the new click version of Battletech, or as they called it, MechWarrior Dark Age. And it wasn't bad. It was a very different game. It was not at all Battletech, as anyone knew it at that point. But it played real quick, and they could sell a ton of it because people blind box it, and you could still have tournaments. And I had more bins than I cared to admit about that game too. And it was in its own way fun. So that's going along. Battletech is all a click-based game, so all the interest is now off on 40K, or Heavy Gear, or in 2003, War Machine, which was the next giant war game to hit the tables, which followed shortly by Hordes, hence why people call it Warma Hordes after a while, in a joking way, because they kind of merged it and all that. And so people are talking about their Space Marines or their Cotter forces. Nobody's talking about Battletech outside of in a click form, and even MechWarrior Dark Age was not WizKids' most popular click product. HeroClix, by far, most popular click product they have. So that's grinding along, and in 5 years later, WizKids decides MechWarrior's really not getting us anywhere, and they look to unload and just focus on their main streams that are really doing great for them, because they dabbled in a few other things. Crimson Skies, which is an excellent game. If you ever can pick it up, please do. It's so much theme. It's so cool. Always loved that game. Anyway, so they dump it, and Catalyst Game Labs buys the Battletech license from WizKids. I think it changed hands through Tops there for a brief period of time, but they didn't really do anything with it. So once Catalyst got it, these people loved classic Battletech. And as you probably know, if you're watching this and have any interest at all, they brought it back in a big way. They started doing beginner boxes and essential boxes and the core game. And they brought it, they modernized a little bit. These are no longer in black and white. And they updated the miniatures to modern injection techniques, so they aren't all just pewter miniatures. You have to file down and all that like the old days. But they really revitalized it. They brought back 98% of the crunchiness, and made old Battletech was really happy, and really started to, it took a little while, but they really started building up. Did some Kickstarter stuff. It really took off for them. And that kind of was their inspiration. With all that stuff said, it's like, okay, we got the crunchy version of that. Warhammer's still topping the charts. So they wanted to find, without being clicky, a way forward that's more fast, because you still can't play. They brought classic Battletech back in the sense also that if you have a 5 battle mechs on 5 battle mechs fight, that's going to take all day. If you got 10 battle mechs on 10 battle mechs, forget it. So you're never going to see a table full of Warma Hordes or 40K and people duking it out in one afternoon, or HeroClix or whatever. It's just not going to happen. So Alpha Strike. So Alpha Strike is very much Battletech, but they cleaned out and simplified a lot of stuff. So it takes it down from location armor and locations of where weapons are and all that stuff, down to this. Much more simple, the same concepts, in general. They're just very boiled down, very distilled, and there's no more hex map. You move like you do in 40K. You measure, you move, you set up the terrain. It's much more scenic, much more eye-catching in the store. You can play 5-on-5 in an afternoon, and it's done pretty well. So now they're maintaining both lines. So if you're ever wondering, hey, getting into Battletech, don't know which way I should go, try both. The basic box sets are really easy, or the starter sets. To pick up. They're not expensive. They come with a lot of good stuff, all the rules, explanations, backgrounds, and then you can just try both and see what you like. Or check out my previous Battletech Classic videos that I've done, and I'm going to start releasing some Battletech Alpha Strike videos here and talk about how it plays and the differences. Most notably, you'll almost never see a one-on-one Battletech Alpha Strike game because it'd be over very quickly as opposed to a classic Battletech one. And there you go. So, all that said, I just thought it was extremely interesting that Battletech Alpha Strike came out of a whole bunch of weird coincidences and other things showing up in the marketplace over time that, from the perspective of a guy working in the local game store, you could just watch based on how much shelf space things were taking up and how much stuff people were playing in the stores as to the direction things were going. In any case, I hope you liked this video. I'm Ray, this is TinyTableGames. If you have any thoughts, disagreements, comments, questions, or fond remembrances of either being the annoying RPG guys in the corner or of glaring at the annoying RPG people in the corner, please leave a comment down below. And I'll see you next time when I'll either be playing Alpha Strike or another game as I work on still clearing out my ever-growing shelf of games I have not yet played. I'll see you next time.